things to raise about American Ivy League schools.
Yeah.
Now, if you would, sir, would you share that story with us?
Well, first of all, I should back up by saying that this has been a bee in my bonnet for quite some time. And if you do listen to my podcast, you know that I've returned to this question with dismaying frequency. But I love nothing makes me happier than taking a pot shot at Harvard University. That's like my favorite thing. It's my special place. And my favorite thing, so I also robbed with other public schools. And one time I figured out that the endowment of Princeton University was so large that, you know how endowments work? You take out 5% of your endowment earnings every year, and you use that to offset the budget of the school. That's how every institution around the world that has an endowment operates. In most schools, you have endowment, 5% is just a modest offset to the operating revenue. Princeton's endowment is so large that when they take out their 5% from their endowment, that number is so large that it covers the entire operating budget of the school for that year, with $1 billion left over. So it's a perpetual motion machine. They can never run out of money. They could, in fact, you could go for free. They could give up all their government grants. They could stop charging for parking. They could give away all the books in the bookstore, and they would still have $1 billion left over at the end of the year. And the reason this interested me so much was that people who graduate from Princeton still give money to Princeton. So I was like, what's the theory here? It's like, you might as well just make a pile of cash on the front lawn of Princeton and light it on fire. They can't use your money. If the world was incinerated by a nuclear bomb, Princeton's endowment would still just keep on getting bigger and bigger. Like, there's no scenario. So, like, why would you do that if you were a rich person? Why are you giving? People still give hundreds of millions of dollars from school, even though. And so I found that just kind of intellectually so interesting that rich people, graduates from Princeton who like to believe that their degree from Princeton is a mark of their intelligence, then turn around and act in the stupidest way possible with respect to their own institution. I thought it was highly amusing. So I had moved on with this book. I got very interested in the fact that Harvard University participates in more varsity sports than any other university in North America. So now you think, if I said, name me a sports-obsessed university, you would say Ohio State or Clemson or something. No, it's Harvard. So the question is, not only do they participate in more sports, but if you are a recruited athlete at Harvard, you get in with way, way, way lower test scores than anyone else. They have an affirmative action program for people who participate in sports. Now, let me give you a list of some of the sports they participated in. You can then draw your own inference. Sailing, tennis, fencing, 2 rowing teams, not just one. Rugby. Now, rugby is the one that I focused on in this chapter because I was amused by the fact that they have a rugby team, even though in America, no one plays rugby. So anyway, I came up with a theory for why they would do this. Why would they not only devote enormous amounts of resources to playing these obscure sports, but also give the people who play them an enormous benefit of admissions? Because it's not obvious, right? I mean, they have a sailing team. No one, while sailing on a yacht in the middle of the sea, notices that the skipper is particularly adept at sailing this ship and says, wow, you must have gone to Harvard. Like, it's not a thing that, it's not something that we associate, right? But it turns out, like, the best way to get into Harvard is to be an athlete. The conventional wisdom is all wrong. It's not to be the best student in your class. No. It's to be the best athlete in your class. In the litigation that Harvard was involved with about admissions practices, there's 2 moments. One is when they're walking through how admissions at Harvard work, and they give a special break for children of rich people. Obviously, if you give 20 million, apparently, you just did. And they give them, if your parents went there, big break. And then they're talking about this, and the expert on Harvard missions is then asked, well, and what about if you're a recruited athlete? And the guy goes, oh, yeah, the athletes always get in. And he repeats that phrase. It's hilarious, you know? In fact, so it's easier. I would have thought if you're the number one way to get in the back door is to have a rich parent, like giving 20 million. No. It's to be like a really, really great fencer. And so my explanation is that they like kids who play these country club sports because the only way to be good at them is to have a parent or parents who can afford, right? I figured out, you know, how much it costs to be a really good junior tennis player in America? You have to spend between 50 and 100 grand a year on your children's grand strokes. So if they say we're going to reserve special admission slots for tennis players, what they're saying is we're reserving 6 tennis slots a year for the children of parents who can afford to spend $100,000 a year on their children's ground strokes. So what they're saying is we're setting aside these slots for rich kids. It's another way. It's a way to keep their number of rich kids up. It's totally blatant and obvious, and it is an act of social engineering, right? And the reason I get upset about this is that in America we just went through this incredibly contentious argument about affirmative action for children who grew up in disadvantaged minorities, right? And this has been going on for years. It was this heated debate and goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and finally everyone says it is a violation of the American principle of meritocracy to let in someone just because they happen to be from a socially disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged background. And then they turn around and they say, but if you're going to do affirmative action for rich kids, that's fine, right? And this drives me crazy. And it drives me crazy that no one calls them on it, right? And so it's apparently fine to do it for privileged kids, but not fine to do it for underprivileged kids, right? So that's the reason for this. This is why this irritates me so much, because I feel like if there's anything that America stands for, it's the promise of a real meritocracy, right? And then they're just blatantly in your face, these supposed guardians of the meritocracy turn around and have these ridiculous policies to aid privilege.
You have 2 little ones, 1 and 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just fact checking the numbers. They're just there.
Well, at that age, they change between waking up in the morning. So when you said they're 1 and 3, I was like, well, they're 12 hours older than they were this morning.
That's right. Kids measure
I'm
their
not
ages.
here. I'm at home.
Yes.
Who knows what's happened?
Yep.
One could be, reading this point without my
One
knowledge.
could be learning how to fence. A lot of people look to you, of course, Malcolm, to explain the world around them and how something came to be. But I think people also look to you to kind of look to the future, not in a clairvoyant way, but sort of like what you see. And I take your point from earlier in the conversation that don't get too caught up in that the world is this divided. But I think people have genuine concerns right now about their place in the world and how the world's going. Parenthood always gives people a different perspective on sort of future and hope. And I'm just wondering how you're thinking about that now that you're a dad of 2 little kids.
Well, I used to give parenting advice until I became a parent, and then I retired. I permanently retired from that game. How do I think? Well, I do. I sort of get it. My great regret is that I didn't have children in the 50s. It would be really fun, I think, to be a parent when everyone else was a parent. So I would love to have been a parent smack dab in the middle of a baby boom. Because if you look at the kind of baby boom is really interesting. These sort of demographic bulges. It is a massive demographic bulge. And it literally would have been the case that if this was 1955, most of us in this room right now would have been roughly the same age because the bulge was so large, and all of us would have had kids at home. And if you think about a world in which everyone has kids, it really is constructed for kids, right? And everything, your life as a parent is so much easier when the whole world is constructed on the expectation that everyone has kids. And now, it seems to me like because the norm is no longer to be have kids, the world is not nearly as inviting to families as it once was. So I sort of I regret having missed the great, missed the boat of that, like imagine if you walked into a restaurant with your kids in 1960. First of all, if your kids start screaming, no one's even turning up, because every kid in there is screaming. The restaurant, like the whole thing, every family is there's food on the floor everywhere. It's like there are high chairs at every table. They have a whole like section of the restaurant just given over to high chairs. They probably have 7 different varieties. They give you, it's just like all the infrastructure's there. Every car was a station wagon. It's like the whole thing's fantastic. Now you got to fight to find a minivan that, I have a minivan. I'm very proud of it. But like, we're down to like 3 usable minivans. This is an outrage. I feel very strongly about this.
I just got rid of my minivan because my
Which
kids
one did you have?
I had the Dodge Caravan, the number one
Did you
selling
have personalized plates?
Yep. Just a picture of me on the side. Thank you. Malcolm Gladwell, everyone. From October, that is my conversation with journalist and author Malcolm Gladwell. It was recorded on stage at Toronto's Winter Garden Theatre for an event hosted by the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. Malcolm's latest book is called Revenge of the Tipping Point, and if you missed any of our conversation or want to share the audio, you can find it streaming on our website, cbc.ca/Sunday. Montreal, that's the Bar Brothers with Half Crazy, and they will play us out this week on the Sunday Magazine. Our team is Emily Kiribazio, Levi Garber, Brianna Goss, Andrea Huang, Pete Mitten, Aronde Williams, and Lou Joe. Our senior producer is Howard Goldenthal. Our executive producer is Brian Colton. cbc.ca/Sunday is the place to stream and share all of today's stories and get our podcast. You can share your thoughts with us by sending an email to sunday@cbc.ca. It's a brand new year, and that means next weekend we'll be playing a brand new round of our monthly challenge. That's puzzling. I'm Pia Chattopadhyay. I thank you for lending us your ear. Until next Sunday.
This is CBC Radio 1, 104.7 FM in the West End. Breaking news happens anywhere, anytime.
Police have warned the protesters repeatedly, get back.
CBC News brings the story to you.
as it happens.
Hundreds of wildfires are burning.
Be the first to know what's going on and what that means for you and for Canadians.
This situation has changed very quickly.
Helping make sense of the world when it matters most. Stay in the know. CBC News.
The CBC News is next, and then it's What on Earth?
I'm Michelle Elliott, in for Laura Lynch. As we head into 2025, are young climate activists optimistic about their fight against the climate crisis? What on Earth's youth climate action columnist joins us for that conversation.
This is CBC News. Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Shu Neely with the CBC News from Montreal. Quebec's health ministry is warning people in the greater Montreal region to keep an eye out for possible exposure to an ongoing outbreak of measles. Officials say 4 cases have been confirmed in the province because of an outbreak that began last month. The first person was exposed to someone who lives outside Canada but traveled to Quebec while contagious. The government has updated its list with several more possible exposure locations, including 12 in the Laurentians, 7 in Montreal, 6 in Laval, and 2 in St. Bruno in the Montréal. For the locations of exposure, you can go to our website, cbc.ca/Montreal. A couple living in Montreal is calling out an airline for separating their family at the airport in Uganda. The couple claims Qatar Airways was in the wrong for denying boarding for their children because they didn't have tickets for return flights. As John and Gallo reports, the family is still split up several months later.
It's too stressful, painful.
Olivier Cavalier-Roy is an international student living in Montreal. He hasn't seen his 3 children in person since 2020. This past October, that was supposed to change. But when his wife Rose tried to leave Uganda with their kids on a flight to Montreal, Qatar Airways refused to let the children board.
Whenever I call them using WhatsApp or even on Zoom, sometimes we are praying together via Zoom, and it is really painful. Sometimes I cry.
In an email to the family, the airline says since her children were traveling on a one-way ticket, staff would not let them on the plane. It says a return ticket was required, but Olivier insists they got it all wrong. His kids had valid tourist visas for Canada.
I'm scratching my head to see why the kids were denied boarding.
Immigration lawyer Patrice Brunet says the airline should have let them on the flight.
I can understand the sensitivity around the transporter to make sure that all the documents meet the requirement, but to require a return ticket, this is not something that is that we usually hear.
Olivier says his wife had to leave their kids behind in Uganda for work in Montreal. He also says the family has launched a GoFundMe page to help raise money for his kids' expenses in Uganda. He's also taking his case to the Canadian Transportation Agency to have Qatar Airways pay for psychological damages. John Ngala, CBC News, Montreal.
CBC reached out to Qatar Airways for comment but did not hear back. Overseas now, protesters in Tel Aviv took to the streets last night, angry with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of the conflict in Gaza, and in particular, his inability to secure freedom for the hostages held by Hamas. The group released a video it says is of an Israeli teen held in Gaza since the 2023 attack. Anna Cunningham reports.
Liri Albag was taken hostage at the Nahal Oz base on the Gaza border. She was 18 years old. Local media describe her as a soldier. The Hamas video is undated and unverified. It purportedly shows Albag sitting in a dark room and talking to the camera. Speaking in Hebrew, she calls for the Israeli government to secure her release. In a video response, her parents say this has torn the family apart. This isn't the Liri we know, says her father. Her mother addresses her directly, telling her, "We're fighting for you, we aren't giving up on you, and you're coming home alive." They also appeal to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and world leaders to take decisions as if it were your own children. Netanyahu says Israel is working tirelessly to bring home the hostages. Anna Cunningham, CBC News, London.
Back here at home, Quebec City hotel operators ended 2024 on a high note. The local tourism agency says occupancy rates were comparable to those from last year's Christmas period at 77%, but that's higher than those in other major cities such as Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, and Vancouver. The head of Destination Quebec says the agency is working with businesses to adapt to climate change and keep attracting visitors, for example, by creating refrigerated ice slides and skating rinks. And that was your CBC News. Here's your weather forecast from Environment Canada. For Montreal into the Laurentians, a mix of sun and cloud today. Windy, highs between -11 and -13, colder with the wind chill. In the eastern townships, mainly cloudy, windy, a high of -15, a wind chill near -24. For Quebec City, mainly cloudy, a high of -13, much colder with the wind chill. In the Gaspé and the Magdalen Islands, a winter storm warning in effect. Snow beginning this morning, extremely gusty winds, a high of -3, much colder with the wind chill.
Hey, I'm Michelle Elliott sitting in for Laura Lynch. This is What on Earth, where we bring you a world of climate solutions. In 2024, we heard from young people involved in climate action across Canada. They share their feelings about the changing climate and what it's like to fight for their future.
That's bad because it's killing all those polar bears. I like polar bears. We don't want polar bears to die. Slowly, the climate's getting hotter and hotter.
I've met a lot of young people who are well-versed in the topic, well-versed in politics, and their voices don't matter as of right now in our current political system. And I want to give all those people a voice.
They also told us how that responsibility weighs on them.
We constantly see young people as leaders, as people who are going to save the world. So I think young people are stepping up to this challenge because we have to.
Around the world, youth climate activists met up in Baku, Azerbaijan, to have a voice at the United Nations climate talks in November of last year.
As children, we are missing. We are missing to be heard by our governments, by our decision makers, by these negotiators here. Basically, we need to have a place in the table.
And what matters is how you channel that into action.
Those were the voices of youth climate activists from 2024's United Nations